we're live. Okay. I guess whenever you get the chance, see if you can see if there's any latency on it. Alright, today we have an iPad Air 2 that's in here for a Chargeport replacement. This one, someone actually broke the lightning cable inside of the charge port, and we were able to extract it, but the pins inside of the charge port are just too far damaged. At this point, the charge port needs to be physically replaced. This one is an Air 2. It hasn't been opened up yet, so we're just going to have to treat it as if it was a normal screen repair and start removing the screen. This one's actually very impressive that it hasn't broken, because in the bottom, right where the charge port, where the iPad was dropped when it had the charger plugged into the charge port, a chunk of the metal is pushing up against the glass. It's going to make removing this glass just a little tricky, but the fact it didn't actually crack the glass, I find that to be the most impressive. Normally with a break or a drop like that, that would have shattered this iPad. So what I'm doing is I'm just going back and forth with this Wagner heat gun, and I'm just feeling both sides of the iPad as I heat it up. Once it's hot enough to the touch, then the adhesive is malleable enough for us to put a pry tool to start separating the glue. And I feel like we're at that point now. That feels good enough. So now we'll take our flat razor blade and we're going to put it between the glass and the frame just to separate some of the adhesive. And once we get it lifted up just a little bit with our razor blade, we will then take a pick and wedge it right to the side of our insertion. Now let's start adding some more heat. Did we get disconnected over there? Or did you just pause it? Okay, just making sure. Okay. Okay, we're going to try that again. I just had to change around some of our settings here in OBS to see what exactly is going on. For some reason our bitrate dropped to about 150 kilobytes per second, but it looks like after resetting some settings and updating OBS we're okay now. Alright, so back to the repair. So what I'd already done is removed the screen from this iPad Air 2, and we discovered, and I should remember because we've done so many of these, is the charge port on this logic board is actually on top of the logic board instead of underneath like on the iPad mini and the iPad Air 1st gen. So this is going to make things a lot faster for us. We don't have to pull out the entire logic board. So I've already pulled up our overhead camera here, and I've gone ahead and put some flux onto our charge port. So now what we're going to do is just tin up our area. We're going to put some new solder directly over our connections. And what this is doing, this is mixing the solder we have with the factory solder. It's going to allow us to remove this charge port a lot easier. It'll allow the area to melt a lot faster than it would have with the original solder. So now that our connection is all tinned up, the next step we're going to do, I'll show you real quick with our camera right here, is we're going to take a silicone mat and we're going to put it just over our battery here. That way, when we use our rework station and apply some heat, it's not going to melt our battery. Alright, so now with that over in its place, oh, wrong camera. Let's turn our microscope camera back on. And the reason we do this is because we don't want to melt the battery, but also we have to use our rework station. Well, it just makes this job a whole lot easier because underneath the charge port itself is going to be some adhesive that is holding down the charge port in place. So the rework station allows us to not only melt the solder, but also make the adhesive malleable. And let's use a medium temperature here on our rework station. Now what I'm looking out for is the solder. I want all the pads to be nice and shiny since they'll be melted. That way, that's a good clue we can start pulling up on the charge port. If you start pulling up on the charge port before all the solder points here, all the actual pads are melted, then you run a high risk of ripping the physical pads off the logic board itself. And I'm just going back and forth. And some of our solder mounts here have melted, but not all of them. And we're getting closer. So the left side is starting to melt. One, two, three. Okay, we're going to try this one more time. This is the second time that we've had to restart because of our bitrate for some reason drops significantly. But let's see if we can finish up this repair before the bitrate drops one more time. So, where I last left off is we have successfully removed the charge port from the logic board, and now we are going to remove it from the rest of the board so we can get the new one in. Change over to our overhead camera. And where'd our screw tray run off to? Here we are, so we got our screw tray. Now we're going to remove the black tape off of our speaker connections on the charge port. Let's open that back up. Unplug the speaker connections, and now we're going to unscrew the charge port from the iPad itself. And this is where Apple likes to be a little troll, and it probably has a purpose just because the home button's right here. But right here we have some adhesive, some foam adhesive, and underneath it is going to be some more screws. The only thing I can think of is the home button goes immediately behind it. It probably prevents the home button from touching the metal and therefore being conductive and having ghost home button touches. Only reason I can imagine that's there. So now with our screws unscrewed, charge port has been removed. Now let's grab our new charge port. Where had I placed it? It's right here underneath our fume extractor. So now we are going to go ahead and solder this directly onto the logic board, then we'll get it lined up with the rest of the placements. screw placements. Set all this to the side, turn it back on its side, grab our, what's the word here? Silicone sheet, and go back to our overhead camera. Where'd my tweezers go? There they are. And for some reason, my plunger for my Amtech flux, it for some reason will just keep releasing flux. And so that's why we have so much here. And I try to put it onto the tip of my tweezers, but we can see there's still just a lot of leftover flux. And there comes a point where there really is no such thing as too much flux until it's just a mess. So let's clean that up a little bit. I wasn't trying to get that much flux on, but it will work for what we're wanting to do. Alright, we're going to line up the screw holes right here on the left, or these transparent holes are going to be where we put alignment holes, that's what they're called. And now that our charge port is aligned, I'm just going to touch one side up, and then I'm going to grab the other side. So that side looks good. It did look good, but it's not good anymore. Which means I didn't actually touch the logic board. Try this again. So let's hold that down with our tweezers this time. And we got that connection. Now let's group this one. That one looks good. Alright, so let's start touching up all our pads. I'm going to clean this up at the end with a micro pencil, but I'm just trying to put a ball of solder onto the tip of all these pads here. So now that every pad has a little bit of solder on it, I'm going to grab my micro pencil here that has a knife tip on it and start touching up each individual pad just to make sure that they all have a nice connection. So for each pad, I'm just holding the tweezers right next to it to apply pressure to the flex cable itself. And I'm touching up each pad with this micro pencil, which is just a very tiny micro soldering iron. That way I know that both the flex cable itself and the logic board side, where the flex is soldered onto, has a nice solid connection. That looks good. It looks like we're starting to drop our bit rate a little bit, so let's see if we can complete this repair in time before we lose connection for a third time. And this is nothing more than just 99% isopropyl alcohol onto the end of a Q-tip. And if you look right down here at the bottom of the charge port, the isopropyl alcohol is actually cleaning / rubbing part of the black paint off the flex cable. It's nothing dangerous, it's just cosmetic at this point. So all that looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to take my rework station and apply some heat to the general area to evaporate some of the alcohol. And we still have a good amount of flux on here. So let's put some more isopropyl alcohol onto your Q-tip, dropping some more bit rate, getting closer to potentially losing this stream. Let's clean it one more time. Now, the adhesive that we removed earlier that was covering the FPC connections, I'm going to put that back. And then the actual adhesive that was covering the FPC connection, I'm going to remove that as well. And put it back where it came from. And now that all that is cleaned up, we will take our charge port, forgot the word there for a second, and it has some adhesive underneath it, so I've gone ahead and removed it, peeled it off. I'm going to line it up back into its home. And put all the screws back in the same way that they came out. I'm not sure why the stream kept dropping. And now, admittedly, I don't have a streaming computer. I'm just using my 2015 15-inch MacBook Pro. And I had to get an adapter for Thunderbolt to Ethernet so that I had a connection directly to Ethernet. And it seemed like that we just kept dropping stream. So I have Ethernet and Wi-Fi enabled just as a backup if for any reason our Ethernet Thunderbolt adapter is faulty. I may invest into a streaming computer in the future, but I'm just testing out the waters to see how this is going to work out. So our charge port is screwed in like it should be, and now I'm just putting the speakers back into the Chargeport FP or jaw connection. Right, and then it looks like there's still just a little bit of flux on the end. Our battery, it took a little bit of heat, but not enough to actually damage the battery. All it did was just act as heat shrink to the basically black outer casing that covers the battery itself. And then, I almost forgot, we got to put this tape that covers our speaker connections back down. That looks good. Let's hook up our let's hook up our screen and make sure that this is now going to properly charge, and if so, then we will remove the existing adhesive that's on here and replace it so we can close this one up properly. Our LCD and our digitizer is connected. Let's put our battery screw back in. Come on. And where is my charge? Alright, so I got my USB ammeter, and I'm plugging it into our iPad. And let's see, so the iPad has acknowledged that it's getting charged, and right here in the display it looks like the backlight LED is going out. And I did mention that to the client before we moved forward with this repair, so that's something that was already pre-existing. Now looking at my USB ammeter, we are drawing 0.9 amps, so close enough to a whole amp. So that's going to be a successful repair as far as the charge port goes. Next steps are going to be to remove the adhesive. We're going to have to chip off the dent. We're going to grind it down so that we can put the glass back in without this potentially breaking under pressure. And part of the iPad is actually bowing too, so we're going to have to bend that part back together as well. And looking at our overhead camera, we'll see that it is at 1% and it is properly charging. So that is a successful repair here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, but we do have some more repairs on deck. I have two Apple Watches, an Apple Watch 3 and Apple Watch 4. We may or may not stream that. We're just having a little bit of technical difficulties here with our network. I think we may have figured it out, but well, we'll see where the day takes us. But I hope that's been informative. I hope this has been somewhat fun to watch. If not, just leave some criticism behind, and I'll see you